Greetings, fellow Americans. Welcome to Fireside Chats, State of Our Nation. I am your host, Susanna Tanner, candidate for Congress 2026 and President 2028. So, it is a little bit warm in here, so I have to keep one of the lights off. So, sorry if you can only see half my face. It's quite an interesting day, I'll tell you that much. First off, Senator Mitch McConnell is still in the hospital. I have seen rumors flying around the internet about his lack of public appearance and health transparency. I think it's important to remember that when any other senator or House representative has passed, regardless of political affiliation, the public has been notified immediately. So I'm pretty sure that if Mitch McConnell had passed, we would already know about it. Now, Senator McConnell may or may not return to Congress, and we have procedures for filling his spot in that event. Let's hope we get a more solid update soon. Until then, let's wish him a speedy recovery. Most of us will agree that being in the hospital for any length of time sucks. Now, about the Iran conflict. About the Iran conflict. And if you saw a glitch there, it is probable that my OBS studio disconnected. So we'll see. About the Iran conflict. 2 service members have died, and many others were wounded following an attack on a Jordan military installation. So, Trump. How many service members get to die unnecessarily due to your poor choices? I suppose I'm not surprised, considering Trump has never served and avoided the draft multiple times during the Vietnam War. My best to the soldiers engaged in the conflict and their families. May they return home safely. Un momento. My OBS studio is continuing to disconnect and reconnect. So I will have this available to release as soon as I'm finished. Hopefully it doesn't mess up the recording too awful much. Now, I watched Donald Trump's speech from Friday, and for all of the words that he spoke, he didn't really say much. He is making claims that China interfered with the 2020 election and that he has proof of it. He continues to claim that mail-in ballots are fraudulent and more fraudulent than electronic voting systems. He also states that the electronic voting systems are vulnerable. And yes, they are. So basically what he's trying to do is play both hands. And that's not going to work. Mail-in ballots are the most secure way to conduct our elections. Trump released documents that he claims support his statements. I have reviewed those documents, and his statements that they support his election interference claims are a flat-out lie. There's nothing in these documents that confirms that China interfered with our elections, or even that there was significant amount of voter fraud. Many of the pages are so heavily redacted that they are unclear. They look like nothing but black lines all through them. They just seem jumbled. So what it looks to me like what he's doing is, once again, trying to spout lies, and we're catching him on it. I'm going to quote an Associated Press article about this release of files. The White House promised a bombshell and they delivered a dud. That is from David Becker, Executive Director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. There was absolutely nothing in these documents that was news, he said. Nothing here that even calls into question past elections, and certainly not the 2020 election. I definitely have to agree with that. Now, according to Trump, China has all of our data and obtained it around the 2020 election. He claims that China has acquired 220 million U.S. voter files. There's no evidence that China has actually interfered in our elections, though, aside from trying to influence our perception. The documents detail Russia's election interference efforts, which amount to similarly trying to influence our perception. I have received myself several security alerts in the past few years about someone from Russia trying to hack my accounts, but to the best of my knowledge, as of yet, they have not succeeded. I do try to keep my accounts secure, and I recommend that everyone do the same. Now, there are, of course, vulnerabilities in our voting system, especially when it comes to electronic voting. It's my understanding that there are not supposed to be modems in the electronic voting devices, yet there are, and that makes them incredibly vulnerable. What is even more disturbing is that we know that Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge, like the meme coin, stole our data, walked right out of the doors with it, stole our data from the United States government, and now it's out there. So if anyone has our data, it is because it was stolen by those who were supposed to work for the government. They are betrayers. They are traitors. The election vulnerability PDF states, we assess that centralized election-related data repositories, such as voter registration databases, poll books, and official election websites, are most vulnerable to exploitation, and adversaries could use these systems to disrupt the election process. It also says systems that tabulate, transmit, or display election results are vulnerable to localized exploitation, but would be difficult to manipulate on a wide enough scale to alter the election outcome. I suggest making this note about these documents. They do state, we do not know whether any of them have specific plans to manipulate election-related systems. That's a direct quote from these documents. And then it goes on to say Russia almost certainly said that so right earlier. Recoinitered. I will get that right in a minute. I was saying it just fine earlier. All of us all U.S. state election networks during the 2016 election cycle accessed election-related infrastructure in at least 2 states and exfiltrated voter data from at least 1 state. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are all capable of conducting similar operations during the 2020 election cycle, judging from their known cyber capabilities and past operations. But, and that was a direct quote, that it does not say that they actually did interfere. This declassified information states adversaries could alter data to potentially prevent individual voters or groups of voters from voting, causing delays on election day or forcing voters to use provisional ballots. Adversaries could also use the registration data, which in some cases is also available publicly or for purchase, to tailor other interference or influence efforts. But again, it doesn't state that they actually do that. About state and local election official websites, quoting from this document, these states or these sites provide public information about voting locations, or in some states are used to report voting results. Attacks on or compromises of these sites could deter individuals from voting or casting doubt on election results. Continually making false claims casts doubts on election integrity. According to U.S. state and academic investigations, at the 2019 DEF CON Cybersecurity Conference, hackers demonstrated the ability to compromise more than 100 voting machines, all of which had been certified for use in at least one U.S. voting jurisdiction. That right there tells me that paper ballots are the way to conduct our elections. You know, I gotta say something though about this whole interference with elections. If a foreign government is taking time to waste money to have people interfere in another country's elections, they got way too much time on their hands. They must be bored out of their damn minds. Now, about China specifically, the report says that the IC, including the NIO, which is the National Intelligence Organization for East Asia, and other NIC officers, assesses Beijing has not deployed influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election. This tells me that either the people who made the report are lying or Trump is lying about China, in which case they have grounds for a defamation lawsuit. Now, for some reason, the next sentence after that one is partially redacted, but I can infer from what is remaining that Chinese leaders desire a stability in the U.S.-China relationship and, quoting, believe they have a range of tools that can achieve their goals regardless of who wins the election. It does say that the NIO for cyber and the Director for Election Threat Analysis assesses that Beijing has taken at least some low-level exploratory steps to undermine the president's re-election chances by denigrating him and shaping voter perception. Their assessment differs from the IC's judgment that Beijing has considered but not deployed influence efforts to affect the presidential election. Now, as far as low-level exploratory steps like denigrating him and shaping voter perception, okay, I could actually believe that. But it's not actually interference in our voting systems. And I believe that Russia is also largely responsible for that type of undermining and denigrating. However, from my view, from what I observed, it wasn't directed towards Donald J. Trump. It was actually directed towards Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. This is what I saw during the election process: attempts to influence our perception. Now, it does say, partially redacted, that sometime in 2019, a redacted somebody somewhere assessed that hostile forces could fabricate claims that Beijing was interfering in the election to demonize China, and that no matter who won the election, Washington's hardline policies against Beijing were unlikely to change. That really sounds exactly like what Donald Trump did on Friday, tried to demonize China. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I really have a difficult time believing that they are so bored that they need to interfere in our elections. That just tells me that somebody had some kind of scapegoat claim. Despite the president's attempts to blame China, to divert attention from the pandemic and his electoral prospects, the managing tensions without causing irreparable damage to bilateral relations over the next 6 months remained in China's interest. So there's no reason why they would need to, especially whenever they claim they have the tools to maintain positive relationships with the United States. So I'm also going to quote, the Chinese, something redacted, had assessed something redacted, that racial conflict would be a large factor in the election. Something redacted. Government-affiliated Chinese technology company employees were assisting a redacted somebody with a campaign, another something redacted, to covertly incite violence and protests against the U.S. government. That sounds pretty familiar too. That's page 4 of the China Influence Report, and that statement is very concerning. Who was working with who to covertly incite violence in the U.S.? I believe that we have a right to know. It goes on to say, something redacted, China, or Chinese, something redacted, we're experimenting, something redacted, with the creation of deep fakes intended to denigrate President Trump in response to directives made by somebody to improve Beijing's ability to manipulate public opinion. There were a lot of deep fakes in the last election for certain, and it was very concerning. Those deep fakes still continue. What we can definitely infer from all the redactions in just this particular document is that there may have been some initial tampering, but not to the extent that Trump is claiming, and more along the lines of influencing the opinion of the people as opposed to actually changing election results. Now about Russia. There are some heavily redacted bullet points in this document on page 2, but according to the third bullet point, President Putin and senior Russian officials are overseeing efforts by proxy, potentially spreading claims about former Vice President Biden, as well as Ukrainian politicians and alleged Ukrainian influence in the 2016 U.S. election. Of course, these claims include that when the former vice president was in office, he engaged in criminal activity in his dealings with Ukraine and individuals tied to Ukrainian energy from other proxy actors. As you can see in the declassified files, they are saying that basically there's no real proof that any other country truly influenced our elections. I'd be interested to know what's under those redactions. On page 5, there's some pretty heavy redactions as well. On page 6, it does say that in January, Iranian counter-cyber actors tried to compromise a server associated with a U.S. business involved in election infrastructure. That could have been one of the businesses that created the voting machines. Quote, a redacted agency or person and the FBI worked with the company to remediate the problem. In June, Google announced that Iranian-linked cyber actors had unsuccessfully attempted to spearfish email accounts associated with campaign staffers working for the U.S. president. Iran pursues such efforts in part to acquire derogatory information it could release publicly, as well as to inform its broader aims of weakening the U.S. and damaging its standing abroad, which does not surprise me at all. There's nothing that actually confirms that China or anyone else actually interfered with any part of our election. Now, there's a few other documents here, redacted of course. There's a CIA note on Venezuela. There's also an email about other nations trying to influence our perception of the candidates that we are looking at voting into office, though. We don't have to listen to them. It's important to judge a candidate by their actions here in the United States, by their intent in office, and by other factors that do not include hearing some bot account continue negativity toward a candidate. Here's something interesting, though. Prior to Venezuela's 2012 presidential election, somebody redacted, reported that Hugo Chávez's intelligence services, including the General Directorate of Military Counterintelligence and the Bolivarian Intelligence Service, worked with the National Electoral Council and Smartmatic, a company, to develop plans to manipulate election results using pre-programmed voting machines. Something redacted reported that these plans called for deploying altered machines to approximately 300 voting centers in traditionally pro-Chavez areas to ensure victory by approximately 1.5 million votes. Following the election, which Chavez won by approximately 1.6 million votes, sources reported that Chavez congratulated his team for successfully implementing the manipulation plan. That's pretty scary. Why would they even need to do that in a pro-Chavez area? I mean, that just speaks to the insecurities of the people who administered the fraudulent activity, Chavez himself. It also says that in September 2020, somebody redacted reported that Venezuela and somebody redacted had developed detailed technical plans to manipulate the December 2020 National Assembly election using what were something redacted. According to this report, the technique involved creating a second set of virtual machines that would replicate legitimate voting machine results, then substitute manipulated data while making votes appear to originate from legitimate machines. That's pretty worrisome. And it would not surprise me if that's something that happens here in the United States, or happened during the 2020 election for this current term. That doesn't mean that Venezuela interfered in our elections, though. In the election report, it says the replacement paper voting system also contains vulnerable components. Here's where it gets more worrisome. In 2020, ImageCastX ballot marking devices printed voters' completed ballots on paper, but encoded their selections in a barcode that voters had no way to verify. A barcode. A researcher showed that hackers could change the votes encoded in the barcode without even having physical access to the machine. That is so concerning. So now it makes more sense why Donald Trump wants to have our mail-in votes barcoded, because then he wouldn't have to have access to the actual paper ballots at all. They would just have to have the barcode and could change votes accordingly. I'm actually interested in what the Election Truth Alliance has to say about the release of this information. For those who do not know, they are a newer organization conducting investigations into elections around here and around the world, and they are already investigating, and this information will definitely help with their investigation. It's all the more reason to reject the Save America Act. There's one other thing that I'm going to point out. Donald Trump has continued to call many of our legacy media outlets fake news. And our legacy media, the big national ones, NBC, CBS, ABC, all those, they are our legacy media. We've been watching them for years. And in my experience, they have reported the truth. And when they make an error, they correct it. Donald Trump is setting himself up for a defamation lawsuit, an enormous one. And I truly believe that ABC and other legacy media news outlets should sue him for defamation, because he intentionally, maliciously attempts to restrict our First Amendment rights to free press and free speech, damaging legacy media credibility and their reputation with us. I believe that legacy media are entitled to defamation claims against Donald Trump and his administration. Everyone in this administration who has claimed that legacy media is fake should have to pay legacy media for defamation. And in my opinion, China could sue him for defamation too. That's all I have for today. Thank you for your time, and may our path lead to peace and prosperity.